Alyona, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Could you maybe just start by telling us a bit about who you are?
I'm a CEO at Transparency International Russia. It's a chapter of the global anti-corruption movement, and we now work in exile. For a long period, I was responsible for anti-corruption education and provided educational events for different audiences. I also worked as a lecturer at the Higher School of Economics. At that moment, I guess, the best university in Russia. And so I'm a researcher, a lecturer, and educator.
Yeah.
Great.
And you worked in TI Russia for a while, right?
From 2010.
Yes.
So it's a long period.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So just to kind of start off this topic, we thought, because the public in Norway, there's this impression, which is correct, clearly, that Russia is quite a corrupt, quite autocratic country. Can you kind of unpack from the TI Russia side and from a Russian standpoint what this actually means, what this looks like in practice when we're thinking about, accountability of government, repression, illicit financial activities, and all of these things? What are the main issues that you focus on from Transparency Russia's side?
Firstly, corruption is really hidden phenomenon, and it's very difficult to give a real explanation. It's true not only for Russia, but for any other country. But if we will base our opinion on some research, like indexes, because this complex approach may be the most prominent one, we will see that Russia always in the very bad situation, and we will see this high level of corruption. And I would say the situation is a bit better with petty corruption, with everyday corruption. It is the result of reform provided in 2008 when Dmitry Medvedev became a president, and his intention was to show that Russia can be a reliable partner at the international level. And it really worked because Russia was interested in attraction of investment from foreign countries. And that's why it was necessary to improve not only the legislation, but of course implementation. And all efforts on implementation of electronic government, for instance, they resulted in the low level of corruption for everyday activities. Now people can easily use about 80% of governmental services through the electronic platforms, and you can imagine it's very difficult to bribe civil servants. It's still possible, of course, but it's an exception, and it's a normal thing that people can, for instance, use medical services or to have an access to education without any corruption practices. But it's quite opposite if we characterize grand corruption. And at the top level, we see that public officials, they just created the network and they can have all necessary resources and all benefits that they would like to have. Because the whole system is built for that purpose. And the main idea is there is a statement that the law is for enemies and friends can have whatever they want to have. The basic principle.
Yeah, so when you talk about grand corruption, it's for those in power, and kind of only for those people.
It's firstly the possibility to change rules. And when decision makers can see some obstacles for their decisions, they can create new rules. Like, for instance, such kind of rules were created for civil society in Russia.
Yeah. So that's the next thing we wanted to kind of talk to you about is obviously working in an autocratic state. It's very difficult in the first place to cover corruption and work on anti-corruption as civil society, but even for journalists. But after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, there's been an even further development in this field. Do you want to say something about what's the state now for organizations like TI Russia or for others that want to kind of work on highlighting these issues in Russia?
I guess it's one of the most important issues that we need to cover because I can't imagine that anti-corruption strategy can be effective without civil society, just unimaginable. And yes, we know that authoritarian style and authoritarian approach usually don't, so representatives or those people who share these views, they don't think that it's necessary to engage non-governmental organizations or journalists or activists and anyone else. But what we can see, yes, some results can be achieved, but they will not be stable. Like in case of China, for instance, in 50s and 60s, when they used really repressive measures against those involved in corruption. And the result was impressive from the first side because they really decreased the number of corrupt officials. But later, those officials, they started to communicate with each other and just try to avoid any inspections, and the results were not stable. And now it's almost the same in Russia, because the official rhetoric is that we need to struggle with corruption. But there was a funny statement of the head of the Constitutional Court yesterday, who started to explain that corruption is unbearable and it's very spread practice all over the world, and we shouldn't do anything because it just exists, and don't try. You don't need to spend any resources for that. But mostly still at the president level or at the level of regional governors, they promote the anti-corruption agenda. And it's really funny that in Russia, even kindergartens do have anti-corruption policies. Imagine, you can easily find the special unit on the website with explanation how to avoid corruption. But of course, on the other side, if we check the conditions for civil society right now, so the government created all regulations that make it impossible to participate and to do meaningful things. I mean, inside Russia. That's why, for instance, we should work from outside because we do have the movement. Transparency International movement was designated as undesirable organization. What does it mean in practice? It means you can't communicate with Russians anymore. You can't provide anything. Otherwise, you would be punished, and everyone who would communicate with you also can be punished. So for organizers, it's a criminal punishment and it's imprisonment. I guess the minimum term is 5 years, or people can be fined just for communication. And right now it's even possible to confiscate property if some people still do have property in Russia for communication with undesirable organizations or for foreign agents. It can be ground for confiscation. And of course, people can't protest freely. Otherwise, they can be imprisoned too, and terms are very high. And there are a lot of cases when it's especially painful for me that young people were imprisoned for anti-war position. So just for one motto, like I'm against war or I support Ukraine. Or
on social media or
anywhere, on social media or on streets. If it happened, authorities react very strictly and use these all possible repressive measures against civil society.
We also saw that the previous CEO of Transparency International Russia is being there's a criminal case initiated against him.
Ilya Shumanov.
Yeah, the criminal case was initiated against Ilya Shumanov for the violation of foreign agent law. So previously, transparency was included in the list of foreign agents, and there are some obligations, like you should accompany all your materials on social media with the statement that Transparency International is included in the register of organizations with the status of foreign agents. And if you don't do that, it can be a personal post on Facebook. If you don't do that, Ministry of Justice can consider it as a violation. Yeah, and that's why Ilya was accused.
So that's what happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. Exactly that.
But so then Transparency Russia moved from the foreign agent kind of list to undesirable, or is it?
It's a parallel stories, and there is another funny thing because from 2014 we did have the status of foreign agent. Then we were included in the list of undesirable organizations, the movement. And now, Transparency International in Exile in December of the last year, additionally was included in the list of foreign agents. So it's kind of nonsense.
Interesting, yeah. So what I'm really not shocked, I guess I already knew, but it's so different to hear it from you directly, is how, there's this rhetoric of fighting against corruption in Russia, of fighting against the petty corruption on an everyday basis. But then we know at the same time there's grand corruption, so there's corruption in the top levels of power, and those levels are making it impossible for the actors of civil society who are trying to implement anti-corruption measures in everyday life to function. So it's a very kind of ironic type of circular...
Yeah, it's Kafka and Orwell. That's how we do call it.
Kafkaesque for sure. Yeah, but yeah, so now you're working from exile.
Yeah, right.
What type of works are you doing, and what are your focus from your work right now in Transparency Russia?
We have several projects, and in our projects, we always try to find the smart, in the best way, how to minimize corruption in the different spheres. But of course, right now it's very difficult if we characterize Russia. And I guess mostly we do that for future. That's why we work a lot with the youngsters. For instance, we organized a festival for school children in Montenegro, children of expats, Russian expats, and we invited artists, for instance, graffiti artists. They created the logo of the festival. So the 11 years old guy created it. Nice. Then they painted also together. They used even rap composition. And I remember one guy created a composition about Navalny. And he's also very young. Also, we used some intellectual games to discuss issues of corruption. And asked different questions, and it was very impressive that they guessed a lot of questions and puzzles that we used. We also provided some environmental walkings and near the sea, discussed how corruption affected in the environment and why people suffer because of it. Because I guess one of the main problem, and particularly in Russia, that people sometimes don't realize what are real consequences of corruption. They think it's more about politics, about politicians and these top-level officials, and this maybe everyday life. They can't see the connection between that.
So transparency.
And I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead.
I didn't cover. I cover just one field.
Please continue.
Yeah. Also, we have a very strong team of investigators who work with issues of money laundering, and they found out a lot of schemes. Particularly, I guess it's very interesting, the field of cryptocurrency, because now it's a widespread practice, and even they were resulted. So the investigation resulted in closing of some cryptocurrency offices because they violated law
in Russia.
In Russia.
Okay.
Even in Russia. Okay. And also there was a scheme, and it allowed to launder about $40 billion. So Russian companies, they used fake contracts, and according to those contracts, they bought equipment for plastic reusing of plastic. So special machines,
recycling.
Recycling. So like a very good aim, but in reality, they didn't buy any equipment. They just put a huge amount of money in those contracts, and it was during 6 years. So it was possible to reveal this scheme after whistleblowers' explanation of that. And I guess it's really great that it's possible still, because even if a lot of informations were closed after the war started, still some information is available, and our colleagues, they work with SINT sources, and it's very effective, I guess.
And so you can still do this report work in exile?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's mostly online?
Mostly it's online. This information is available, so it can be information about income of public officials. We can compare it with data from different registers of property, and that's how you can find undeclared property of some public officials. So it still works.
Okay, nice. So obviously, now we've talked a lot about corruption in general in Russia, and a big backdrop for this conversation is the ongoing war in Ukraine. Could you talk a bit about the relationship, if you see any, between corruption in Russia and the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I guess there is a direct link between that, as far as I can see. And of course, I started to search on this topic, especially after the war started. And I found out that a lot of researchers have shown that those countries where the control of corruption is very weak, they are mostly those countries which initiated war conflicts. And it means mostly they do that to keep resources and to increase the opportunities for this illegal influence on other countries also, and to keep their power. So when you need a rhetoric that can unite people and to show the way how to be united.
Rally around the flag.
Effect, exactly. So it's, I guess, the best way for authoritarian leaders how to do that. And what we can see, for instance, as a result right now, in Russia, there is a lack of resources because I guess Russia was not ready for such a response on behalf of Ukraine. And
sanctions?
No, it's not about sanctions. I mean, Russia was not ready for such a long
military conflict.
Exactly. Because they thought that maybe a week it's enough. And I'm really proud that Ukraine did it. So good. Of course, it's a real pity that it happened, but at least now, I guess, Russian authorities, they realized their purposes can be achieved in such an easy way. But the government started to use also a lot of corrupt practices, for instance, to fulfill the lack of resources, and they started the process of what we call nationalization. It's not maybe not the proper economical term, but during the privatization process in 90s, a lot of companies became private, and now the government outlines that the process was illegal. There were a lot of violations, and there is even not a term right now to protect your property. So they can just expropriate these companies through the trials. So it means they. And sometimes they even use it against companies which CEO spoke against the war.
Okay.
So it's for them, it's a kind of revenge for inappropriate behavior. And it's very, very... very popular practice right now. In huge amount of companies, they faced this possibility to be expropriated by the government. Imagine.
Yeah. And so then the government takes over the company and can use the resources for whatever they want.
Yeah, of course. And they what is interesting, how do they allocate these resources? For instance, foreign companies who operated in the Russian market, right now they also work against them. And Danone, for instance, it was given to the relatives of Ramzan Kadyrov. So you can easily find those loyal people who will follow all your orders, and of course will not.
That's the Chechnya
is a region of Russia. Yeah.
And he's the head of that region, right?
And Ramzan is the head of this region.
Do you think the corruption at the grand level is undermining the war effort now, or? In some sense, it's also questionable, because there are a lot of cases against the heads in the Ministry of Defense or in the defense sphere. So I guess for the government, it's also important. To keep resources, to have loyal people nearby, and to avoid any possibilities for not revolution, but any actions against them. And so it's, but in some sense, yes, I would say yes. Because they're not the most competent they could have been, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
But I guess it's like a dual dynamic, because in one way you need the resources more than any time before, so you can't waste resources on paying off people.
Exactly.
But then again, you also need their loyalty, so it goes both ways.
Yeah, it's very, very complicated.
Yeah. I think one thing that you also mentioned earlier, which was very interesting, and I think the war really illustrates this, but also in general, is how it's difficult for people to relate corruption to their normal lives, to their everyday lives. But once you put it in context of something else that is happening, like a war, you can see it much more clearly. You know, what are the problems of these this abuses of power, abuses of finances? And you mentioned also earlier another type of way of illustrating the consequences of corruption in your life, which is this idea of environmental corruption or like environmental degradation that comes from corrupt practices. And there's also maybe a link here with Norway that makes this even more relevant for us. Do you want to talk something more about this?
Yeah, we can, for instance, start with the Chernobyl case. When it happened, USSR didn't inform anyone, and the first publication in media appeared in 10 days after the catastrophe. But we now clearly see that it affected Norway too. Norway, Sweden, Finland, and so those traces were found in different different countries. And I guess a lot of environmental catastrophes, so it's like cross-border phenomena, and we can easily see if, for instance, Russian companies will violate environmental regulation, and how is this possible? Exactly because of corruption, because they pay money to inspectors not to inform about these violations. And if we have the border and we have the common sea, so that waste, of course, will float from Russia to Norway. And that's the very easy way, I guess, to show. Or if we will check a recent catastrophe in Black Sea, when two tankers were. I forgot this term for them. So these two tankers, they had mazout. Do you know mazout?
No.
It's a kind of oil oil component.
Okay.
So this mazout, and it's very dangerous for the environment because birds, for instance, if this part of oil will be on their wings, they can't fly. And it's usually will lay down on the bottom, and it's a very long period when it will disappear. So it's like hundreds of years. And what was the main reason? Those tankers, they were very old, and it's they even didn't have proper documents to entry the Black Sea.
Right.
But they did that. So how was it possible? Exactly through the corruption violations. And now people, for instance, they can't just enjoy their holidays in that area because everything is spoiled through that. And for Norway, of course, so being a neighbor of Russia is risky in some sense. Because these bad guys, if they feel the possibility to violate all those legal restrictions, it can be connected with the impact for environment. And it's about a lot of things. And now even the issue of green green economy also can be affected by that because people spend money for the new equipment and sometimes they use it also for the as a possibility to receive additional profits. Like people can collect some lands to put these sun stations and so on, and violate the law. And what else? If there is a country that can show this bad example, it can be repeated by other countries. And what we can see, for instance, I guess, in case of Trump administration, they also, I guess, there is a term even in the political science, authoritarian learning, when authoritarian leaders, they learn from each other what to do, how to suppress people, and how to increase their income. And that's the case, I guess.
And I guess this is the classic kind of argument against corruption in a way that it creates the ability to bypass regulations or to bypass processes through financial gain or through other types of gains, kind of breaks down the fabric of a rule-based society. And we see it here with environment, that it's the same as when you talked about the recycling machines, right? The ability to produce something of lower quality that doesn't meet regulations, and the possibility for the tankers to be in the Black Sea without the proper registration. It all comes from this ability to bypass the rules through gain or through money.
Absolutely.
But another thing that this made me think of is, which is an extra problem in authoritarian state, is who takes accountability then? when something goes wrong, because in society where there's strong rule of law, or the possibility to persecute this type of activities, like we like to think that Norway is this, sometimes it's challenged, but most of the time this is the case.
Yeah.
Then those people would be persecuted. But in a country like Russia, or even increasingly in countries like the US, where money controls a lot more than it should. How can we get accountability for these things?
I guess it's very, very difficult.
I know you can't answer this, but it's
we can think about this. So I guess what is one of the main responsibilities of civil society right now? We should gather, we should collect proofs, collect evidence, because I still believe that international jurisdiction, international judgment can work. And in case of Putin, for instance, and in case of all his surroundings, who I'm pretty sure committed crimes against humanity. So it's really necessary to have this possibility to use this evidence in international courts. And I guess it's also the role of investigative journalism right now, because it's very difficult to find these proofs, and that's one of the way that can be how it can be done. It's very questionable, and that's why I think some civil society organizations, they take this responsibility in some sense. So, for instance, they try to show, if we characterize authoritarian countries, by the way, not only Russia now works in exile, also we have Transparency International Venezuela, and it's also the case. They also should left the country. And I guess civil society organizations can be leaders of opinions in this field. And now I guess it's also very important, because we see this anti-trend in the field of anti-corruption. When America, for instance, when Trump frozen the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and some other, or group on kleptocracy, and some other bad signs that really we should respond. And I guess collective actions, that the possible response that we can give in such a situation. And that's why I'm really happy that our colleagues from TI Norway, for instance, they supported us, and we can think what we can do together in this field. While some governments are not responsible, and it's very difficult to make them be responsible.
Right. Well, I mean, it's super important work, and it's really, really impressive that you keep doing the work even in exile. And it sounds we have read some of the reports in preparation for this podcast, and it's really amazing that you can continue the work and that you're doing it. As you mentioned earlier, civil society is so important to hold the government in check, especially in authoritarian regimes as Russia, as you mentioned. So. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, and also thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great to have a conversation with you.
Good. Likewise.